Hi, I'm Mike Duran. I'm the director of the Center for Peace and Security in the Middle East at the Hudson Institute. And it's my great honor and pleasure today to have a conversation with Dr. Hillel Frisch. He is an emeritus professor from Bar-Ilan University in Israel, and he's a senior associate at the Jerusalem Institute for Security and Strategy. He is one of the foremost experts in Israel on Arab politics. He's written very insightful articles about the Arab Spring, and he has now conducted a study of Al Jazeera's broadcasts, among other things. Dr. Frisch, hello.
Hi, how are you?
Great to have you here.
Great being here.
To get us,
I don't know what here is exactly, but it's somewhere across the transatlantic.
Great to be meeting you here in cyberspace.
Right.
So, to get us started, why don't you give us an overview, if you will, of your study of Al Jazeera and the findings?
Okay, I'll begin with the idea that all states and all political movements usually couch their vested interests or their national interests in moral rhetoric. I mean, that's a common thing. I mean, in the United States, for example, it doesn't matter whether it's Biden or whether it's Trump. He can scour the Russians for their human rights violations, and the next day take a plane to Saudi Arabia and have a very warm give a very warm embrace to its leaders. When Saudi Arabia has as poor a human rights record as Russia, or even worse. So this is common to all states. So you would expect, for instance, a country like Qatar to be engaging in this, and that the gap would be much even greater between the true interests that they're pursuing and the moral claims that they're making. Why do I think that the gap would be greater? And because they're one of the most vulnerable countries in the world. They're vulnerable because they're smaller than Connecticut, and they're dwarfed on both sides by huge countries relative to them. I mean, Iran has 600 times the population of their nationals, and Saudi Arabia probably at least 100 times. And they're the most wealthy. They're the wealthiest per capita country in the world. So that makes them very, very attractive. In Wikipedia, they say that the GDP per capita for a Qatari is $90,000 a year. That's 50% greater than the United States. But that's not really the true figure, because that figure is divided by the total population of Qatar, but only between 12 to 18%, 320,000, are actually Qatari nationals. The other 88% are foreign nationals, or even foreign nationals, but some of them have been born and raised already third generation in Qatar, but are deprived of all rights. So this is a very, very vulnerable country, and therefore one would naturally expect that they buy off opinion makers, and that they buy off allies and enemies. The other very distinctive nature, well, it's not really that distinctive, is that Qatar is a very despotic state. I mean, like many other, like the other Gulf states. I mean, I can just read read you the summary of Freedom House media site on Qatar. Qatar's hereditary emir holds all executive and legislative authority and ultimately controls the judiciary as well. Political parties are not permitted, and the only elections are for an advisory municipal council. While Qatari citizens are amongst the wealthiest in the world, the vast majority of the population consists of non-citizens with no political rights, few civil liberties, and limited access to economic opportunity. So basically what I was interested in was looking at Qatari media policy, because Qatar in the Arab world is very, very famous for its media site called Al Jazeera in Arabic, but it also possesses two other sites. One is Al Jazeera in English, and the other is AJ Plus. Nothing in the name suggests Al Jazeera, but in the media site there is reference to Al Jazeera. It's not kept a total secret. The affiliation. Al Jazeera in English is far less successful than Al Jazeera in Arabic. Al Jazeera in Arabic is probably the major media site in the Arab world. Al Jazeera in English ranks with the fifth biggest media site in Australia. I mean, just to give you a proportion. I mean, it doesn't even rank amongst the top 100 media sites, news media sites in English. And Al Jazeera failed miserably in creating Al Jazeera America, which it did in 2013, and it folded basically in 2015, which is interesting in its own right, but I didn't really study it. So I wanted to see what kind of consistency is there between AJA, which is shorthand for Al Jazeera in Arabic, AJ and AJ Plus, and AJ and Al Jazeera in English. So the first thing that I did was I compared Al Jazeera Arabic with BBC Arabic, CNN, and Fox News. I analyzed content for 60 days between June and November 2022, related to 9 issues: women, lesbian and homosexual rights, democracy, discrimination, environment, immigration, religion, Israel, and Egypt. Basically, I wanted to look at 3 general areas. One was conservatism, the other was democracy and human rights, and women. So, my chief comparison was with Al Jazeera in Arabic's major Arabic competitor, which is BBC Arabic. BBC Arabic being part of the BBC. BBC is the largest news media site in the world, at least according to viewings. So that's the first thing that I did, and then I wanted to compare AJ Plus, both with AJA and BBC in Arabic. I had basically 3 hypotheses. The AJA would focus more on Israel than BBC Arabic. The AJA, Al Jazeera in Arabic, would focus more on religion than BBC Arabic, and that AJA would underreport progressive concerns such as human rights, reports on gay issues, and environmental concerns. Basically, all three hypotheses were easily corroborated. Basically, I can just give you the ratios. On women,
Sorry, before you give us that, I have a little confusion in my mind about how AJ plus, just in general terms, is different from AJA.
I'll get to that. I
But
mean,
in terms of how they, just in terms of how they sell themselves to the world, what do they say about themselves?
So I was going to get to that on when I got to AJA. They're very clear in how they describe themselves. They describe themselves as a social justice lens on a world struggling for change. Very, very third worldly. And
Okay.
I would say even there's a racial content. They aim at the sort of not, they don't aim at the Black or at the Caucasian populations in their respective languages, the biggest being English, but they also have a Spanish and an Arabic. Basically, people of color in between. That's the I'll give you just one more quote that appears on their site. AJ Plus is a unique digital news and storytelling project promoting human rights and equality, holding power to account, and amplifying the voices of the powerless. I'm very very
I got it.
progressive, third worldly, and of course, I'm going to argue that this is not exactly in jiving with the character of the Qatar regime that finances it. And
Right.
I'll just say something about financing. I know that it completely finances it, finances all of these three, because none of them have advertising. So this is very expensive, and otherwise you can't. Advertising is the name of the game.
Right.
If you don't get advertising, it means that someone is underwriting the costs. So none of them have any advertising. So getting back to, I mean, I was looking. I compared AJ Arabic with BBC Arabic because the British are known, but rightly or wrongly, as the most very objective, reasonable people.
They
Therefore,
sound it even if they aren't. They have
right. So I mean, as I was saying, all the three hypotheses were easily corroborated. I'll just give you some examples. On women, for instance, in Al Jazeera Arabic, there was only 30% of the relative contents on women matters as there were in BBC Arabic. In other words, in BBC Arabic, there was more on women, 3 times more on women issues than in AJA. On homosexuality, I was really surprised that the ratio was relatively small. In other words, that BBC Arabic reported 2.5 times more relatively on homosexual than AJA. Actually, I didn't. I would have assumed that AJA wouldn't touch the subject, but they did, but in a very small amount. On democracy, it was like the ratio on women 3 times more in BBC Arabic. BBC Arabic really promotes women's rights and democracy. Discrimination 2.5 times more for BBC in Arabic. Environment also 2.5 times. only on immigration, there was relative equality, 1.3. And when we talk about conservatism, there was 3 times more religious content in Al Jazeera Arabic than in BBC Arabic. And the other, and of course, in Al Jazeera Arabic, which is bitterly anti-Israeli. I mean, it's not. It really promotes bloodshed in much of it's not even taking a stand. Its visualizations are all there to promote real hostility towards the Israeli state. On Israel, there were three times more relative content in AJA than in BBC Arabic, and you know, counting off just the number of items doesn't really tell the true graphic story that a graphic news media site can do. It's much more than that. I mean, when there's a flare up in Jerusalem, it's just the all-consuming item minute by minute. And on Egypt, again, I took Egypt as sort of an example of possible equality, and indeed there was equality, even though Al Jazeera Arabic was anti-Egyptian, so much so that Al-Sisi closed it down for a while. So that's what really emerges, is that Al Jazeera Arabic is really a very, very conservative media site, inwardly towards society, and very, very anti-Israeli externally compared to BBC Arabic. So that was that. I mean, the ratios are so great that I don't think that any error that I could have possibly made would have changed these findings. Then I compared, of course, Al Jazeera Arabic with AJ Plus. So I already told you what appears on AJ Plus. It's exactly the opposite of what is told really in Al Jazeera in Arabic. AJ Plus is different from Al Jazeera Arabic in the sense that it's not a classical news media. It doesn't follow news minute by minute. It bases itself on basically programs that range from 10 minutes to 50 minutes. So they're more in depth and not as widespread as in their coverage as AJA. Okay, so as a social justice lens of a world struggling for change, the AJ Plus media site should have naturally targeted the funding source, the Kingdom of Qatar, to promote human rights and equality amongst its overwhelming population of non-citizens devoid of citizenship rights. Holding power to account in its treatment of these non-citizens, and amplify the voices of the powerless. There would be lots of content matter in Qatar itself to give voice to the powerless. Needless to say, the 845 items that appeared in the days that I looked at, not one was addressed, of course, towards Qatar.
Is it mainly addressed toward the United States and the West, or is there?
Yes. is absolutely
and not,
the English, the
yes,
English.
and not toward China or
No.
Russia. No.
No, they have, I must say, they have a Spanish AJ plus. I didn't look at it. I only looked at the English. The English is addressed towards 90% the 80%, I can't remember, the United States, a bit of Great Britain, Europe. I would say in general that the approborium is for the most democratic states in the world, and the rest are left out of the analysis.
Right.
So I looked at these same seven subject areas, and the ratio between AJA and AJ plus was far greater than the ratio between AJA and BBC Arabic. I mean, regarding women in AJ plus, there was 9-1 more items than AJI, 5 more times on democracy and human rights, nearly 17 times more on discrimination and immigration, and 80 times more on environment. And of course, wow. Qatar, as a major gas producer, is in frequent violation of environmental concerns. So this was, I mean, the findings are pretty graphic. But really, what really gets you is looking at the content, at the programs themselves, and I'm just trying to look for it. I just wanted to look for I'll just give you maybe some. By any major objectivity, AJ Plus should have aired a series on, they have a series on Untold America. That's their major feature. Is a feature document. These are feature documentaries that explore all facets of the American identity, what it is to be American, I'm quoting, what it is to become American, and what it is to live as underrepresented, forgotten, or misunderstood American. The show has explored these questions across diverse landscapes, from tribal lands in Alaska to the streets of San Francisco's Chinatown, to rural landscapes in Texas and Appalachia. By any measure of objectivity, AJ Plus should have aired a series on Untold Qatar to explore the persistent suppression and marginalization of the indigenous population from South Asia, but of course that's not mentioned. In the series Direct From, very popular, by AJ Plus correspondent Dina Takururi, explores injustices, turmoil, and conflict, and most of it is on the United States. The first video featured in this series is the US military prepping for war with North Korea, with the perception that war against North Korea, arguably the most despotic, inhuman regime today, is innately unjust. Another view entitled How the US Navy Poisoned Hawaii Families by Navy Jet Fuel. Mm. This is what goes on. So of course, I was struck by the fact that in January 2022, Biden declared Qatar to be an important non-NATO major ally of the United States, and I really don't have much of an explanation why Qatar is doing this, except maybe to deflect would-be enemies. I mean, this is why they this is why Qatar is home to Hamas terrorist leaders. All the three out of the four top people in Hamas are now in Doha. Saleh al-Aruri, Mishal, the former head of the Hamas, and the third one basically divides his time between Gaza and Doha, but increasingly in Doha, given the splendor of Doha's hotels compared to what Hamas has to offer. So maybe this is part. The only explanation I can give is that maybe they feel that this is how they deflect criticism and potential maybe terrorism.
I'm certain that it's that, but it's also a way of projecting influence, is it not? I mean, they make themselves into the mouthpiece for movements that don't really threaten. They don't threaten Qatar in any way, but they put pressure on the surrounding countries with whom they have rivalries.
Yes, but you would think that they would address them directly or indirectly. Why take this very strong anti-United States? Or maybe they feel it. I mean, this is something that leaders in sort of who have all the wealth in the world, but they still have to. They feel that
I'm sure it gives them a little bit of, feelings of strength and backbone. But when I last delved into this topic seriously, which is already nearly 20 years ago, the impression that I had was that the Al Jazeera newsroom was full of Palestinians. These are not necessarily separate categories, but Palestinians, Islamists, and Nasserists. And you got it was a weird hybrid. Not just 20 years ago, but it was a weird hybrid of defunct, outmoded Nasserism with all the kind of Nasserist third worldism that it's still there in some form, Pan-Arabism, combined with the Islamism of the Muslim Brotherhood, and then you had on top of that Palestinian nationalism, and so it was the ideological trends that were and then a little dose at the time as well, a little dose of when I say Islamism, that was mainly Muslim Brotherhood Islamism, but they dabbled as well in some of the Takfiri strains of thought as well, and made themselves a platform for bin Laden. And I thought it was, as you say, a way of deflecting, a way of appeasing would-be adversaries, but also projecting power and influence into the Middle East by making themselves one of the most powerful broadcasting platforms. They're amazingly good at being on all sides of every issue, and then turning themselves into mediators. The Israelis themselves have turned to the Qataris all the time to mediate with Hamas.
Yes,
the Americans turn to them to mediate with the Taliban. Yeah. So it's kind of, I mean, in terms of a coherent ideological message, it's a hodgepodge and there's all kinds of contradictions. But as far as a diplomatic strategy, it's pretty successful for them.
Right, and it's very similar to their real diplomatic. I mean, they house the biggest American military facility in Udeid, which is which is home to the Central Command forward operations, to an Air Force, a big Air Force base, which Qatar lavishes has lavished $8 billion in its creation. And at the same time, it was the only country in the world that maintained airline relationship with Iran throughout the COVID crisis. Even the Chinese gave up. I mean, Qatar's warmest ally is Iran. So this kind of duplicity in the media is basically a reflection of their foreign policies as well, and they're very adept at it.
Yeah, you kind of have to you kind of have to marvel at it, really, I think.
Yes, and yes, so I guess being truthful is not the way to succeed.
No. The truth is widely overrated as an effective strategy of diplomacy. But
I guess Lincoln wouldn't have called them a strong non-NATO ally.
I don't know about that.
George Washington
I don't know
with the cherry tree, at least.
Foreign policy. Foreign policy often often breeds some strange bedfellows. It seems to me like the Qatari model that you're describing is one that the rest of the Gulf states are now following.
Trying to adopt, yeah.
Yeah, I mean the
United Arab Emirates.
The hedging. My own personal feeling about all of this is that if any of this if any of the communications activities of the Qataris get in the way seriously of the United States achieving any of its major interests in the region, then it's really the failure of the United States, not of the Qataris. To failure of the United States to clearly articulate what its interests are and to insist that its allies work with them to achieve it. And I think this. Go ahead.
Maybe in fairness to Qatar, maybe to a certain extent, Doha is what was Casablanca in 1942 under Vichy. Everyone needed a Casablanca,
right?
To recruit the agents against the other side. So the Americans need Doha as a forward base for espionage of Iran. Iran needs Doha as a forward base to spy on the Americans, and it's a kind of so.
Well, they certainly know how to make themselves useful to all parties or to many different parties, including the Israelis, which is
yes. I wanted to get to that. I think it's a very.
Go ahead and tell us a bit, please, about the relations with Israel.
Israel basically, first of all, it allows AJA to be all over the country. I mean, it's unbelievable that during the rounds of violence between Hamas and Israel, you see their correspondence right next to artillery batteries of the Israelis. I mean, I can't even understand how they allow that. Because some of these journalists might be agents, and they might report the exact location of the artillery battery surrounding Gaza. So Israel allows the emissary, the Hamas, the Qatari emissary, to bring cold cash. It allowed. Now, presumably, it's going through the banks so that there's some monitoring. But for 5 years, it allowed cash, and of course, one has to assume that Hamas takes a certain percentage of that cash to promote its military capabilities, and its military capabilities have increased. My position about what explains Israeli complicity with Qatar is the hope that Qatar will tame Hamas through sheer corruption. Very much according to that Tunisian father of sociology.
Ibn
Khaldun.
Ibn Khaldun, yeah.
Ibn Khaldun, that you effeminate society and you demilitarize them through corruption. That's the only explanation I have why Israel deals with Qatar in such.
Have you posed this question to some of the Israeli authorities who are supporting this policy?
Wow, we should. That definitely. But Israel, I mean, that's one of the problems now with this judicial reform. Some of it has to do with the control over the military industrial complex, which is one big black hole. I mean, that I know from my family. My daughter was a senior economist in the controller's office, and she just says the military, that's just off. That's just off grounds, and that's one of the undercurrent battles in this judicial reform. There's the right-wing religious young leader Smotrich. He really wants to civilian authority over the military, and this is why the deep state basically is binded with the left and center left, as far as I can see. But I think it's really about taming. So far, it's not really working, but maybe over the long run. I also think that Israel thinks that its learning curve is always better than what Hamas threats can pose, and therefore that it can deal with Hamas even if this hypothesis proves wrong.
So that no matter what Hamas comes up with, Israel will always be a step ahead.
Yes.
Yeah.
And I'm not sure that's being brought into question right now with the increasing coordination between Hamas and the Jihad al-Islami and Iran.
Well, that's a good point for us, I think, to transition with the time we've got left to the current situation, if you don't mind, because you are, of course, an expert on Arab politics and particularly on the Palestinian dimension. And I wonder if you could just give us a kind of survey, as you understand it, of the Iranian attempt to bring about coordination among the Palestinians, different Palestinian factions, Hezbollah, the Iranian-backed militias in Iraq and Syria. We just saw a very interesting report in the Wall Street Journal, apparently well-sourced report, saying that Ismail Qani, the head of the Quds force, was on a secret mission to do precisely that, unify all of these different Iran-affiliated militias to carry out coordinated attacks on Israel. How likely do you believe it is that Iran will succeed in that, in bringing these very different militias with different organizational structures, different capabilities, and different relationships with Tehran, turn them into a kind of a unified instrument against Israel?
Okay, I would just like to say that the current Iranian efforts stems from increasing Israeli activity, air activity against both Iran and Hezbollah in Syria, very, very punishing. So they're looking for ways of changing the rules of the game, not making Syria totally vulnerable to Israeli attack, upping the costs of and therefore basically creating some kind of deterrence against Israeli action in Syria. That I mean the Iranian aims are due to Iranian interests. It's not out. There is a tremendous problem in creating this coordination, and the real problem is Hamas. Is Hamas. Islamic Jihad is an organization that has very little civil backing. It's totally a military force, which is why it has greater latitude of freedom of action.
And I always think, correct me if I'm wrong, but I always think of it as an absolute tool of Iran.
Yes.
That with no Iran, it's basically a lever that Iran can pull without any negotiation with the.
Right. I would even say today, even more so than Hezbollah, because in Hezbollah, you have to take account of the Lebanese constituency, the population. Islamic Jihad is almost divorced from Palestinian society, but Hamas isn't. I mean, Hamas is deeply rooted in Palestinian society, and their coordination with Iran will come at a great cost to the organization. It's a short term. It's very enticing in the short term, but the costs will be in the long term. Why? Because the Sunnis, the Arab Sunnis, have basically been totally alienated from Iran. First, in the first decade in Iraq, when the Shiite regime, from their perspective, brutally suppressed the Sunnis. It continued into the second decade with the Syrian regime, Alawite regime, that brutally repressed the Sunnis in the periphery, in the rural periphery. Actually, many middle income Sunnis backed the regime, but that's not acknowledged. That's not acknowledged by Palestinians, and it's not acknowledged by the Sunni population writ large. I mean, even before that, Iran never made any ideological headway in the Arab world. But so how do I know to what extent the Sunnis object to Iranian interference? Hamas was forced to leave Damascus in 2013 and to take a base in Doha because of Palestinian public opinion. Right. So that's the weak point in this coordinating effort. In a speech on Friday not by Ismail Haniyeh, but by the military leader, praising Iran. By the following Sunday, Musa Abu Marzouk, number 3 in the organization, already had to apologize, ostensibly to the Turks and to the Turkish population, but he was also apologizing to the Palestinians. They didn't like that this leader quoted for the first time ever, as far as I know, he quoted from Khomeini and showed a photo of Khomeini. This is unacceptable. Khomeini is not viewed by most Sunnis. There are leftist, progressive, secular Sunnis, but there is a very small minority. So that's the weak link in the coordination efforts. I'm not sure that they'll be totally successful. They tried turning World Jerusalem Day, which is a which is basically an Iranian invention. They tried coordinating to mobilize on the fourth week of Ramadan, and
Yeah.
it was a total failure, amongst the Palestinians. I think that the threat is exaggerated by Israeli experts, and but of course
Oh,
there is the physical missile sort of attempt at siege, creating a missile siege on Israel.
so if I were to summarize your analysis, you would say we might, if there's an escalation between Iran and Israel, we might see some missiles being fired from all of these different Iranian affiliated entities simultaneously. But so, some operations in parallel, but actual integrated operations among them is really going to be a very, very high bar for the Iranians.
And there's one further point. The Iranians now want to deter Israel with non-Hezbollah Palestinian factions. They want to leave Hezbollah as being the ultimate Iranian air force when Israel directly, physically attacks Iran. They were upset that Hezbollah attacked Israel in 2006. They don't want to repeat that mistake. They want to use Hezbollah only as the last resort. So this is why they're trying to build up. They're trying to build up the lesser level for the Syrian arena alone.
Interesting. I also thought you perhaps have a different view, but I thought that the decision to use to put a Palestinian face on the recent attacks from Lebanon on Israel was actually a way in which Hezbollah was giving Israel the ability to give it a pass that it didn't actually deserve. That Hezbollah recognized that the Israelis are significantly deterred themselves from attacking Hezbollah, and that if Hezbollah will give them a face-saving measure to avoid attacking Hezbollah, the Israelis will take it. How do you feel about that analysis?
I think the true test will be whether Israel continues massive air attacks against Syria.
But they only conduct them on Syria. They won't conduct them against or they are reluctant.
Right. That's right. They're very reluctant, and I mean that's a clear red line that Hezbollah has succeed in establishing against Israel, and now Iran wants to turn the Syrian activities into a red line as well. Yes, Israel is deterred.
Yeah,
Israel is deterred. Especially I think in Netanyahu's thinking. Just like Iran will only use Hezbollah if there's a direct confrontation between the two countries. He wants peace. He wants as much peace as possible to give Israeli capital, political capital, in the event that it attacks Iran directly. He's totally focused on that issue, and just maintaining the peace in all the other arenas.
Well, I think that's probably a good place to end. I'm avoiding all of my inclinations to ask you questions about the judicial reform, but
no expert. Yeah.
No, but if you're like every other Israeli I know, it's the thing you most want to talk about now. But I'm not going to let you.
No. Okay. Yeah, it's too late.
Okay. So,
Okay.
well, listen, thank you very much for sharing your analyses and insights with us. And I wish you well, and I hope to see you back here soon, back here in
Okay.
cyberspace soon.